Good evening. In this tutorial, we're going to cover Disciplined Priests. Let's start by talking about gearing your Disciplined Priest. Let's start by taking a look at the most important stats for a Disciplined Priest. The most important stat is Intellect, followed by Spirit. Mastery, Haste, and Crit are all equally valuable. Let's cover Reforging. Reforging Disciplined Priests is very straightforward. For any gear that lacks Spirit, simply reforge Mastery, Haste, or Crit into Spirit. Here is a very convenient list of some of the more effective glyphs for Disciplined Priests. I'm going to give you just a moment to look those over. I found them to be quite effective in content leading up through 5-man heroic dungeons. And here is another reference list for glyphs. We have a couple of lists. We have a list for effective prime glyphs for Disciplined Priests, and we have another list for effective major glyphs for Disciplined Priests. I'll give you just a moment to look those over. Again, like the gems, these glyphs have proven fairly effective for me. Okay, great. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the more interesting and powerful discipline talents. Like the other tutorials, we're not going to discuss every single talent. We're just going to briefly mention some of the more important ones. Start by noticing in the discipline tree how there are quite a few talents that empower your Power Word Shield spell. Starting with Improved Power Word Shield. This increases the damage absorbed by 20%. Another talent is Soul Warding. This reduces the cooldown by 2 seconds. Rapture. This is a mana replenishing talent. And Borrowed Time. It grants you 14% spell haste for your next spell after casting Power Word Shield. So as you can see, there's a lot of emphasis in the discipline tree towards using Power Word Shield. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about one of the more complicated discipline talents. It's called Evangelism. Now, Evangelism is a talent that is designed to encourage healers into DPSing sometimes, and it rewards you for DPSing. Say, for example, you're in a 5-man dungeon, you're healing. You cast Smite on a mob. Every time you cast Smite on a mob, it creates 1 stack of an Evangelism buff that increases the damage done by Smite by 4%. So if you cast Smite on a mob 5 times, you'll have 5 stacks of this buff, so it'll increase your Smite damage by 20%. Now let's take a look at a talent that extends from Evangelism. It's called Archangel. Let's go back to the example where you cast Smite 5 times, so you have 5 stacks of Evangelism, and that increases your Smite damage by 20%. Now looking at where it says Archangel, it says instantly restores 1% of your total mana and increases your healing done by 3% for each stack. So going back to the example, you have 5 stacks of Evangelism, and then you cast Archangel. What will happen is it'll increase your healing by 15%, which is one of the nice things to have. My personal opinion of Evangelism and Archangel is, my experience healing, most of the time I just heal. I'm not elite enough, I guess, to spend enough time DPSing with Smite or Holy Fire or whatever to really benefit from this talent, but I'm sure I will one day. So that's great. We're going to move on to another interesting talent called Power Infusion, but this is sort of the priest equivalent of the Mage Arcane Power spell. You can cast it on yourself, or you can cast it on another target, and it'll, as you can see in the description right here, it'll increase the spell casting speed by 20% and reduce the mana cost by 20%. I think it's an essential talent. Now let's have a look at Divine Aegis. This is a very interesting talent. Divine Aegis creates an effect such that any heals that crit create this barrier. It sort of looks like a Power Word Shield that absorbs 30% of the amount healed. This is a pretty powerful talent. Let's take a look at Pain Suppression. This is a really nice defensive ability to have. you can use pain suppression on yourself, or you can use it on a friendly target, and it reduces threat and also reduces all damage by 40% for 8 seconds. So it's sort of like a shield wall that reduces threat. So you even if your tank's almost dead, you never want to cast pain suppression on the tank. That wouldn't be a very smart move. And the last talent we want to look at is Power Word Barrier. What this does, let me go ahead and show you. I'm going to demonstrate what it looks like. When you cast Power Word Barrier, it creates this dome that heals you, and let me double check one more time. It reduces all damage to all targets inside this dome by 25%. It's a nice thing to have. One of the complaints I've had about this spell in the past is that if you're in a situation where there's a lot of fire or a lot of AoE effects and people don't know about this talent, sometimes it can be kind of hard to see. Or if you drop it and then a fire starts right where you drop the dome, obviously people are not going to run into fire to benefit from that spell. But other than that, if you use it in a calculated way, like in a raid, it's very useful in raiding situations. It can be a very nice spell to have. And that wraps up our discipline talent discussion. Last, I want to just very briefly talk about the single target rotation and the area effect rotation for a discipline priest in the context of a 5-man dungeon, for example. For a single target rotation, you'll be using penance and Power Word Shield quite a bit. For the area effect rotation, you'll really only be using Prayer of Mending and Prayer of Healing. So the priority list for those rotations is pretty straightforward. But we can't really demonstrate it here, so instead I prepared some footage of a dungeon, and it should give you a better idea how to heal as a disciplined priest.